I want to kick off the meeting tonight, introduce myself quickly. My name is Mark Deerking, and I'm with Metro, and I cover the South Bay. I'm your representative in this area. I want to welcome you to tonight's meeting on the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project, and this is the third of our 3 meetings on this project for this phase of the project. Before I go much further, though, I want to introduce our Spanish translation interpreter so she can make a statement in Spanish.
Buenas tardes, tenemos interpretación en español por si necesitan. We have a Spanish interpretation if you need. We are sitting on the back row over there if you need a Spanish interpretation. We have a Spanish interpretation if there's somebody Spanish speaking. We're going to be sitting in the back row. Thank you. Si necesita interpretación en español, estamos sentados en la parte de atrás. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And with that, I also want to welcome those of you who are online. This meeting is going to be broadcasted online tonight, so those who are at home or their office can tune in and take a look at it. As in the past, it'll also be recorded so that you can check back onto our website. The URL or the address of the website is on the materials that you have tonight, and you can take a look at the meeting afterwards and if you missed something throughout the presentation. So thank you. Welcome for coming tonight. I wanted to first recognize elected officials representatives. We have Young Ji Kim from Supervisor Han's office. And with that, thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Eric Geyer, who is our rep, my counterpart in the West Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Eric Geyer. I am Metro's Community Relations Manager for the West Side. I, along with my colleague Karen Swift, are managing the outreach associated with this study. We are obviously very, very excited for this project. It is one of the biggest that Metro is undertaking right now, and we are very excited to be a part of it. We are at the very early stages of this project right now. We are in the feasibility study phase where we are looking at different options that we will then carry forward into the environmental process. A very important part of this study is the public component and the feedback that we receive from you. There are a number of ways to participate in this public feedback in this meeting. We have these yellow comment cards. We will be collecting these at the end of the meeting. You can drop them off in the back, or we'll have an announcement at the very end of the meeting, and we'll go through these are question cards, so fill out your questions on them. We'll be going through and grouping the questions as they come up to which my colleague Corey Zelmer will be able to answer more specifically to the project. We also have visual comment cards where you can draw arrows, point, put points on the map, let us know specifically what kind of suggestions you have for the project, and we have written comment cards as well. These are all available at the table in the back, and we encourage you to fill these out and drop them with us as the meeting progresses or on your way out, and also to take them home. Think about it a little bit. This is a big project. These aren't necessarily things where the questions and ideas come to mind immediately. So we definitely encourage you to think about it, talk to friends about it and family members about it that are also use the Sepulveda Transit Corridor and provide us feedback that way. And to those who are watching online, we encourage you to submit questions via the online platform, which we'll also be able to answer later on in the meeting. And in addition to that, we will also encourage you to use the comment methods via email, Twitter, Facebook, to submit those comments to us. Now, just a brief history of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor. In 2008, voters passed Measure R, which allocated $1 billion for a transit project in this corridor. In 2016, Measure M was passed, which allocated some more money, a significant amount more money towards a 3-phase project. Phase 1 is a project which will add an express lane component to this to the 405. Phase 2 is a transit connection between the Valley and the West Side, and Phase 3 is a transit connection between the West Side and LAX. In between these two ballot measures, there was a project for infrastructure improvements on the 405, which set a continuous carpool lane in between the 101 freeway and the 10. And in addition to that continuous carpool lane, there were also a number of other issues which were addressed, which brought this vital piece of infrastructure into the 21st century and modernized it, including new on-ramps and off-ramps, as well as the bridges, replacing bridges that span over the highway at that point. Just this year, this project was included in Metro's 28 by 28 program, which identified a number of projects for potential acceleration in time for the Olympic Games in 2028. And right now, the project is also being evaluated as a potential public-private partnership. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Corey Zelmer, who is going to go through some of the components of the study.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Zelmer, Project Manager for Metro. What I'd like to do is go through an introduction to the project, essentially. We are, as Eric mentioned, very early on in the study, in the project itself. And what we are exactly studying are specifically rail transit concepts for this corridor between the San Fernando Valley and LAX. We're looking at connections. We're really focused tonight, particularly on the connections. And at this part of the study, where do people want to connect to throughout our system, both in the Valley, the West Side, and ultimately down at LAX. We'll talk a little bit tonight about alignments and potential station locations. We'll also look at potential park and ride areas, primarily in the Valley. We are going to evaluate as part of the study maintenance facility requirements. However, at this round of community meetings, we're not presenting actual locations for those. We'll start identifying that or those locations as we get further into the study itself. And lastly, we have divided the study area up into two sections. The first section, which we are focusing on as part of this round of meetings, is from the Valley to the West Side, as shown here. And then at future meetings, we will look at West Side to LAX alignment options as well as station options. So the project area itself is approximately 22 miles long. It runs from the San Fernando Valley in the north, south, through the Santa Monica Mountains, through the West Side, and ending in the LAX area, generally following the 405 freeway. It primarily resides in the city of LA, but also the study area includes portions of Santa Monica, Culver City, Inglewood, and Los Angeles County. Now, there's a number of projects going on at Metro. The Sepulveda Transit Corridor is not the only one. There's many things happening throughout and around our area. It's an amazing time right now in Los Angeles in terms of how much transportation and improvements for transportation are going on. The key point of this slide here is just to acknowledge that with all that's going on, this project, as well as those shown here, need to coordinate closely so that we're making sure to maximize the investments that we're looking at for these different areas of the county. Some of the things you'll notice here is that a lot of what exists today and what are planned in the future are east-west in nature in terms of how they move across our part of the county here. We have the orange line in the valley, which is at the top. We have the purple line extension on the west side. We have the existing Expo line going from Santa Monica to downtown. And then down in the LAX area, we have the Crenshaw LAX line, which is under construction now, as well as the People Mover, which connects into the airport area. So there's a lot going on. A lot of that is east-west, and this corridor is representing a new opportunity to introduce a high-capacity north-south line that can connect the Valley to the West Side and to LAX. So the study area is unique in terms of its the amount of trips that travel through it. I don't think it requires much convincing that there's traffic congestion throughout the 405 corridor, from the Valley all the way to the South Bay. There's severe congestion on the 405 during peak periods. I think we all understand that. Travel times are highly variable, meaning one day it could take 45 minutes on your trip, the next day an hour and a half. So it's unreliable in terms of understanding when you're going to get from one point to the next. The unique nature of the study area also includes the mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, which divide the valley from the west side and LAX. The mountains really only offer one passage between the valley and the west side, and that's along the 405 through the Sepulveda Pass. And given the limited number of options, that forces many, many people to use the 405 to connect between these different areas of the study area. Over 400,000 trips are what we're looking at today, moving between the valley and the west side. But today, only 2% of those trips are being made by transit. So one of the things we did when we started the study is we looked at travel patterns. We wanted to understand where are people coming from and where are they going to. So the map here shows quite a few dots on it. All these dots represent either the starting point or ending point to someone's trip through the Sepulveda Pass. And what we began to see is that trips are widely dispersed throughout the San Fernando Valley, which is understandable. It's a very large area, primarily residential, a lot of housing spread out across the valley. But we did see a slight concentration of trips east of the 405 and north of the 101, which are shown here in the circle. Then moving on to the west side, we also saw a concentration of trips that primarily spans from the city of Santa Monica to Century City, north of the 10. And then moving south of the 10, there was some concentration around LAX, which could be expected. Again, these are trips traveling from the valley primarily through the Sepulveda Pass. Then moving to the west side to LAX section, we saw a similar concentration of trips on the west side. Again, this area is rich in jobs. There's a job density in the west side between Santa Monica and Culver City. We saw the concentration there. Also in Culver City, east of the 405, a concentration there as well. And lastly, a large concentration near the LAX here. And that's, again, trips traveling primarily between the west side and LAX. Now, in terms of why are we doing the project? So typically when Metro begins these types of studies, we ask ourselves, well, what is the purpose and what type of need are we trying to serve out there? I think the need is obvious, right? There's a lot of congestion on the 405, and there's very few options for making trips between the Valley, West Side, and LAX. So the purpose of this project is fundamentally to provide a high-quality transit option which connects people between the Valley, West Side, and LAX. We want it to be a competitive travel option that can serve a very large and growing travel market that we're seeing today and we expect to see grow in the future. In order to do that, we need a transit option that is high speed, that is frequent, that is reliable, and has the capacity to meet the demand we expect to see in the future. All of this needs to be done while also connecting conveniently to other transit lines that are in the corridor area. So let me talk quickly about the study process. So the process shown here is 7 steps. We've completed steps 1 and 2 so far. Much of that involved researching the study area, evaluating different transit vehicle types that we could use for the project, and developing initial transit concepts for the Valley to West Side portion of the corridor. We're here tonight to present that information, to gather feedback from all of you. And then after this round of public meetings, we'll move into steps 3 and 4, which is evaluating the Valley to West Side options in more detail, potentially narrowing down some of those options, eliminating some where we can, and then beginning to develop extensions of those options that can serve the West Side to LAX portion of the corridor. After steps 3 and 4, we'll come back. We'll have a second round of public meetings this fall, and we'll present that information and again, gather feedback from the public on some of these ideas. Step 5 is then taking the West Side to LAX options, evaluating them in more detail, and potentially reducing the number of options we have for that section of the corridor. And then we want to come back in the spring of next year and present end-to-end Valley to LAX concepts, the entire corridor, and get some initial feedback from the public again. Steps 6 and 7 are beginning to look at everything in more detail and beginning to prepare the final report that will be presented to the Metro Board in the fall of 2019. So before I get into the concepts themselves, what I want to quickly do is talk about some of the terminology we use for describing transit concepts. So here we have some of those. We have the type of transit vehicle. So in our case, we could be talking about a train or a bus. Specific to this study, we're focused on rail. So we'll talk about things like light rail vehicles or monorail vehicles, okay? Alignment just refers to the route that the service will follow. Terminus station locations are the final station or endpoints on the alignments for these concepts. Intermediate station locations are in between the endpoints of that alignment. And then vertical configuration just means, are we talking about a service that is at street level or surface level? Is it underground in a tunnel? Or is it aerial on a bridge, like you see here in the photos? So let me move into the transit modes. So we looked at a large number of transit vehicle types when we started the study, and we've narrowed them down to 4 that we're showing here. The 2 on the left represent 2 types of trains that are in operation today in the metro system. We have the heavy rail transit vehicle type, which is like the subway, the purple line or the red line that operates today. We also have light rail transit operating today, which is on the bottom left. The 2 differences for these 2 modes, however, is we're looking at slightly longer trains as part of the concepts we're evaluating. And then on the right, we have 2 new types of transit vehicles that are not in operation today in the metro system, but we're looking at them for one particular unique aspect they bring. They both can sustain higher grades when they're operating, or steeper grades, slopes, let's say. And what we're looking at in this case is how they may possibly be able to go up and over the Santa Monica Mountains as opposed to through them in a tunnel. So those are the 4 types of transit modes that we are currently looking, and we'll begin to show those in relation to their alignments now. So this slide presents all of the concepts that we have for this initial round of community meetings. There are 6 in total. They're not in priority order, so we don't prefer 2 over 3, etc. And what we've grouped them in is we have 2 heavy rail transit concepts, 2 light rail transit concepts, a monorail rubber tire, concept 5, and then an extension of existing line in our system. And I'll walk through each one of these one by one. So starting with concept 1, which is again heavy rail transit. In the center of this slide, you'll see the full alignment proposed for this concept. In the north, in the San Fernando Valley at the orange line, it would connect to the Van Nuys station on the orange line, shown there on the left in detail. This entire alignment is proposed to be underground, which is represented by the solid black line on the map. So this entire alignment would be underground in a tunnel. And for passengers connecting to the orange line, they would need to transfer to either the orange line at the Van Nuys station or to the dashed line shown there, which is the East San Fernando Valley corridor, which is currently in the planning phase today. That corridor is proposed currently to be either a bus rapid transit line or a light rail transit line. So this Van Nuys station would be a major transfer point for these different services. Now, on the south side of the alignments, we have several options for connections on the west side. To the purple line, there's 2 choices. One would be connecting to the Westwood VA Center on the purple line extension. The other would be to connect to the Westwood UCLA station east of the 405 on the purple line extension. From there, extension south to Expo would provide connections possibly at Expo Bundy on the Expo line or Expo Sepulveda. Again, these alignments and stations would all be underground beneath the currently proposed purple line and Expo lines. In both cases, the purple line and at the Expo line, passengers would need to transfer to another station to access those lines. One thing I'll note is that all of the alignment options for the west side portion of the study area are going to be the same for concepts 1 through 4. So I won't repeat them for the sake of time, but just know that as we move through 1 through 4, the alignment options, the connection options to the purple line and to the Expo line will remain the same. Okay. So moving on to concept 2. This again is a heavy rail transit option. Instead of, again in the middle of the map, you'll see the entire alignment from the San Fernando Valley to the west side. through the Santa Monica Mountains. Again, this will be a tunnel. In the valley portion, we would be following the Sepulveda Boulevard corridor as opposed to the Van Nuys corridor on the previous concept. And in this case, the alignment would follow north on Sepulveda corridor, connecting to the orange line at the Sepulveda station, where passengers would transfer to the orange line. From there, the alignment would follow one of two options to connect to the East San Fernando Valley corridor. One would be north and east on Sherman Way, or north and east on Victory to connect to the East San Fernando Valley corridor at Van Nuys Boulevard. Both of those connections would be a transfer to the East San Fernando Valley corridor project. Concept 3 is the first light rail transit concept. So again, in the center of the map, we have the full alignment, solid line. This means it's underground or a tunnel for the entire length. This option is very similar to concept 1 in that it would follow the Van Nuys Boulevard corridor north of the Santa Monica Mountains and connect to the Van Nuys station on the Metro Orange Line. Since this is light rail transit, and since the East San Fernando Valley project could also be light rail transit, this option provides the opportunity to continue trains north along the East San Fernando Valley corridor, all the way north, serving all the stations on the East San Fernando Valley corridor, ultimately ending at the Sylmar San Fernando Valley Metrolink station, which is up north near the 5. In the south, again, all of the options connecting to the Purple Line and the Expo Line would be the same. For concept 4, this is, again, another light rail transit concept. This also would follow the Van Nuys Boulevard corridor north to the Van Nuys Orange Line station. This option, however, includes a new feature, which is a possible branch, which could branch west or extend west along the Orange Line corridor to connect to the Sepulveda station on the Orange Line. That connection would be a transfer for passengers between the Orange Line and this service, but there is an opportunity at that location for a possible park and ride facility. There's one today that exists at the Sepulveda station on the Orange Line. All the other light rail trains not going to Sepulveda could continue north and serve all of the stations in the East San Fernando Valley corridor, all the way up again to the Sylmar San Fernando Valley station. Concept 5 is the monorail rubber tire alignment. Now, there's a significant change here in terms of the map in the middle, the alignment that we show through the Santa Monica Mountains. If you notice, it's a dashed line in this case, meaning that it's not a tunnel. It could either be an aerial or at-grade alignment that would generally follow the 405 freeway, not looking specifically at the median of the freeway, but either side of the freeway is what we're currently looking at for this alignment. But you can see here that approximately around Getty Center Drive, the alignment would transition from a tunnel from the west side and be aerial or at-grade through the Santa Monica Mountains and Sepulveda Pass until it reaches approximately Ventura Boulevard in the valley. At that point, it would transition to an aerial alignment, which is the line shown there on the left. And the aerial alignment would have 3 options for connecting to the transit lines in the valley. The first one would be to go north on the Sepulveda Boulevard and east on Burbank Boulevard, and then north on Van Nuys to connect to the Van Nuys station on the Metro Orange Line. The other option would be to stay on Sepulveda all the way to the Orange Line on Sepulveda, transfer there to the Orange Line, and then potentially continue north on Sepulveda east on Sherman Way or Victory to connect to the East San Fernando Valley corridor at Van Nuys Boulevard. All of these connections to the Orange Line or the East San Fernando Valley would be a transfer from the Sepulveda service to these other lines. Now, for the west side, it's very similar to concepts 1 to 4. However, there is a slight bend in the alignment that comes off the 405 freeway east in order to serve the Westwood UCLA station. Other than that, the connection options are the same. We'd have 2 options on the Purple Line, Westwood UCLA or Westwood VA, and 2 options on Expo at Expo Bundy or Expo Sepulveda. Concept 6, this is proposed extension or extensions of the Purple Line. The Purple Line is currently under construction. It's extending the Purple Line subway system out west of the 405 to serve the final station at the Westwood VA station. The map that you see there in the middle shows the entire alignment running from the valley to the west side. This option has two potential alignments going through the Santa Monica Mountains. The first one on the right is an alignment that would enter the valley following the Van Nuys Boulevard corridor, extend north, and connect to the orange line at the Van Nuys station. The other alignment option through the mountains is to stay more west, closer to the 405, and continue north up to the Sepulveda Boulevard corridor, extending along Sepulveda to the orange line at Sepulveda, and then again, as you saw in the previous concepts, continuing north and east on Sherman Way or east on Victory to connect to the East San Fernando Valley corridor. All of these connections, again, would require transfers to either the orange line or the East San Fernando Valley corridor line. Now, on the south part of this alignment option, what we have is a single extension south that would connect to the Expo line at the Bundy station. And that is currently the only option we're looking at for this concept. In terms of station areas, we have several opportunity areas that we're showing here for both the west side and for the valley. Starting on the left in the valley, again, these all relate to the different corridors that we were studying for the alignments I just showed you. So that's primarily the Sepulveda Boulevard corridor in the valley and the Van Nuys Boulevard corridor. So you'll see here that there are station opportunities along Sherman Way, along Victory, along the Orange Line corridor itself, Burbank Boulevard, Magnolia, and then Ventura Boulevard on the south of the map there for the valley. In P, what we're looking at is potential park and ride locations for the different stations, so possibly co-locating a park and ride facility with that proposed station. The squares that we show here in this map represent stations that could be either underground or aerial, and the circles represent stations that would only be underground. Okay. Now on the west side, we're looking at a number of station options as well. All of these would be underground station options, which correspond with the underground alignments I showed you earlier. Starting in the north, we're looking at possibly a station on UCLA campus, two options on the Purple Line, several options along the Santa Monica Boulevard corridor, as well as the Olympic Boulevard corridor. And the north-south streets that we're looking at are Bundy, Barrington, Sawtell, Sepulveda, and Westwood. So as we move forward, all of the concepts that I showed you tonight will be evaluated in more detail, as I mentioned in the study process. Listed here are the criteria that we want to use as part of that evaluation. We'll use some of these as part of this next step, and we'll use the remainder of these as we move further into the study into more detail. But items such as community input, the feedback we get from the public here tonight and throughout the study. We'll look at ridership potential. So how much ridership could these different concepts generate as part of their alignment and station opportunity areas? And we'll also look at travel time savings. How well do these concepts perform over the existing transportation network, or how do they perform in relation to one another? So those are some of the factors that we'll look at as we move through the study itself. So as Eric mentioned, we are early on in the study. We just had the kickoff at the end of last year. We've done some work that we were presenting here tonight as part of the project introduction. We hope to do a lot of work over the fall and into the next year, and we plan to complete this study in the summer of 2019. Following completion, what we would like to do is take a smaller set of options, less than what we're showing here tonight, that also include the West Side to LAX component of them, and present them to the Metro Board for their consideration to carry a certain number of alternatives into the environmental review process, which is the next step in our project development process. So that's the schedule. We hope to start the environmental process either at the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Eric, who will walk through some of our recent outreach activities.
Thank you very much, Corey. So this is the third meeting in our first round of meetings, and we're going, the next rounds of meetings will track the next steps in the study process. So we're going to take the feedback that we get from these concepts as they have been released and all the questions that come in, and they're going to be factored into the analysis that's been done. And while that's going on, we're also going to be doing analysis on the second leg of this, which is the West Side to LAX. And the next round of community meetings will present those concepts similarly to how we have presented these. At that point, we'll take the feedback, and when all of the concepts and the feedback that we have received are all put together and we have the kind of final concepts that we're going to be moving into the environmental process, then that will be presented in our final round of community meetings early next year. That said, we are off to quite a start in our community outreach thus far. We have built a database of over 7,000 names and contact information, and I would encourage everyone here to make sure that you provide us with your name and email address so we can keep you informed on everything going on, as well as everyone online to please go ahead and sign up as well. On our website, we have a project survey and a project video. The survey has already gotten almost 5,500 participants, and I would encourage everyone to go ahead and participate in that as well. It'll help us gather some vital information as we continue to move forward in the process. We are also continuing to do outreach. We did to promote these meetings, and we will continue to do so as the next meetings are on the horizon. We will be at events throughout the study area over the course of the summer to make sure that folks both inside and outside the study area and folks that can't make it necessarily to these meetings get information about the project and are aware that it is going on. This is the basic contact information for how to get a hold of us. We will accept any and all feedback that you have on these concepts and the project generally moving forward via all of these avenues, whether it email, telephone, Facebook, or Twitter. We want to hear from you, and our goal is to make ourselves as accessible as possible to get that information. Now, at this point, we're going to move into a question and answer period. We have been gathering the yellow comment cards from folks in the audience here. If you have a question that you filled out, I would ask you to please raise your hand right now with your card, and some other staff will be coming by to pick up those cards. And we're also going to be taking questions online and sharing those as well. Because we'll be getting a few questions and they may be under similar topics, I'm going to go ahead and probably summarize some of the questions for Corey so we can move through as many of these topics as quickly as possible. So with that, Corey's going to come back up here and we'll get through some questions. Want to avoid the feedback. Corey, question number 1. Is there funding for this project to be done in time for the Olympics?
Good question. We do have funding for the project. As Eric showed earlier on the previous slide, there is funding identified in Measure M for this, almost a little over $9.5 billion for the project, both phases, from the Valley to the West Side and West Side to LAX. The scheduled opening for the first phase, Valley to West Side, is 2033. That being said, Metro has an initiative, the 28 by 2028 initiative, which is a list of projects that we've identified that we would like to accelerate so that they would be open and operating in time for the 2028 Olympics. This is one of those projects. So we, as part of Metro, we're looking at ways to accelerate. You may have heard that we're exploring the possibility of public-private partnerships as one way of advancing this project and opening it sooner. So everything's open in terms of finding ways to potentially open this in time for the Olympics.
Great, thank you, Corey. A question that we received both here and online is regarding the boring company and whether and how Metro is coordinating with the boring company in building their project and building our project.
Right, so we have opened up lines of communication with the boring company. We've had it as our CEO himself has, Phil Washington, has written the boring company. We're aware of their proof of concept tunnel that they're looking at developing on the west side. We will coordinate with them in terms of how that tunnel is developed in relation to what we're looking at as part of some of the concepts for the Sepulveda transit corridor. And the whole idea is that we're not getting in each other's way, that we're not conflicting with each other's project, and that we're not making either project an issue going forward. Yeah.
Great. Has Metro considered extending the Purple Line to Expo Bundy and then LAX, with the Sepulveda line being light rail all the way to the North Valley?
Well, I will say that's not one of the concepts we showed today, but I wouldn't say that it's out of the question. The extension of the Purple Line south to LAX could be one of the concepts we look at as part of the next phase that I mentioned, the west side to LAX. I think the light rail component of that question is on the table here, where we're looking at Valley to either Purple Line or Expo as part of a light rail option. So that's an interesting idea.
And in a similar vein, is there any particular reason why the proposed heavy rail line cannot continue into the San Fernando Valley region as a heavy rail?
No. The concept 6 that we showed, an extension of the Purple Line, is heavy rail that could extend into the San Fernando Valley. It's concept 6 that we showed. There's a couple options there for connecting to transit lines in the valley.
Great. A question that has come up regarding cost, and of the 6 concepts, is there one that projects to cost the most and one that projects to cost the least?
It's too early to say. I will say that all the concepts we're showing are not cheap. They're complicated. A lot of the things we showed you looked at tunnels through the Santa Monica Mountains, so that in itself comes with a high price tag, obviously. Even the option that looks at going over the mountains would not come without its challenges and without cost. So as we move forward in the study, we will look at cost in more detail. We'll look at capital costs for these different concepts. We'll also look at operating costs. And as I mentioned, some of these are new technologies for Metro, so we have to do some work to figure out how they may compare in terms of cost, capital, and operating versus what we have in operation today in the Metro system.
In the vein of marrying old technology and new technology, can there be a bikeway associated along with that runs along the 405 and West Side associated with this project?
Well, potentially. I'm not sure how a bikeway. A lot of the options that we looked at, the alignments we looked at on the west side, if you recall, are all underground. So these are concepts or alignments that are in tunnels. So there are potentially bikeways that could be on the surface associated with improvements through the cities. But the alignments we're showing on the west side are all tunnel alignments.
Okay. And a question of timing, how long will it take to go from the valley to the west side when this is completed? And along that range, which concept that you've explored this evening would be the fastest?
We don't know yet. I will say that we will look at travel time for all these concepts, whether it be in a tunnel, which many of these showed a tunnel from the valley to the west side, or whether it's going up and over the Sepulveda Pass. We'll include as part of the future information and future meetings we bring, we'll talk about what is the travel time between different points, whether it's the valley to the west side, and ultimately how long will it take you to get from valley to LAX. We'll bring back all those travel times and be able to look at them side by side with the different concepts.
Question on need for the project. Why has it taken so long for the 405 corridor project to come about? Is there a reason that this wasn't developed while earlier iterations of rail, blue, purple, red, and green were built?
That's a good question. It goes back to what Eric mentioned earlier. This is one of the biggest projects that we're undertaking in Metro. With that come many, many challenges. And so it's one of those that we've received additional funding and support from the voters of LA County when they passed the Measure M sales tax initiative. So that went a long way in terms of showing support for a mega project like this to get it to happen. It shows the need that we have in this part of the county to improve transportation options. But until we had that support, until we had the funding that backed it up, this was definitely one of those projects that were challenging to do with limited funds in the Metro program. So complexity and funding are some of the reasons that kept us at bay, but we're here today and we're looking at advancing this project as quickly as we can.
Great. To bounce back to travel times, what kind of transfers will between the connection lines are envisioned?
Well, in terms of transfer, as I mentioned, since some of these stations would be located underneath an existing line, there would be different levels that people would need to transfer, so there is some time associated with that. But one of the points we made on the purpose and need is that our focus as we move forward in the study is to make these transfers as convenient as possible, right? So even if we're moving from an underground station to an aerial station that's part of another transit line, we want to focus on ways to make that as seamless and easy for the passengers. So there will be time involved with making that transfer, but we hope that the frequency of all the services that are offered at that time will make up for some of that time.
Great. A question that came in online, and this is a technical question that I don't think I would ever be able to cover myself. How much additional distance would a monorail over the pass require versus rail beneath the pass?
I don't have the exact distance with me, but as they say, a straight line is usually the shortest route. So the tunnels offer the most direct in terms of point-to-point travel. When I mentioned the 405, I said that we would generally follow the 405, so that's both going up and over the mountain, which adds a distance, and then also the 405 is not straight, it winds through the pass, so you'd be following that general alignment as you move through the pass. So there is additional distance associated with up and over versus a tunnel, which we can be more direct with when we set up that alignment. And as we move forward, as we lay out some of these alignments in more detail, we can provide the exact distances from one end of the alignment to the other. Again, these are preliminary alignments. We really wanted to focus more on the connection opportunities on these alignments to other existing or planned transit. That was our focus. But as we take these forward, we'll add more detail in terms of total distance and distance between stations.
Okay. How would a gas tax repeal affect this project?
It's a good question. We've mostly identified to date the Measure M funding for this project, so that's not on the cutting blocks, let's say, for repeal. We're thankful for that. So as of now, there's not a huge impact to it. That's not to say that the taxes won't be part of the eventual funding plan for this program, but as of this date, we haven't identified it as such.
In terms of South Bay projects under SB1, the Green Line extension to Torrance is relying on SB1 funds. So if the gas tax pulls back, that limits that project's ability to advance and to accelerate. Also, I know that Caltrans is counting on SB1 funds to do a number of highway improvements in the South Bay.
Excellent. Now, the question comes up that MTA has easy access to the right-of-way for the carpool lanes on the 405. Why not do away with the HOV lanes and put a rail system from Sylmar to the South Bay along the carpool lanes?
That's a good question. Well, we have another related project that some of you may have seen at the boards tonight. There are plans to convert the HOV lanes on the 405 between the 101 and the 10 to high occupancy toll lanes or express lanes, or what we call them at Metro. That would be, again, from the 101 to the 10, and that would be in the median of the 405. So in some ways, we're trying to coordinate with that planned project, which is also a Measure M project and identified as the first phase, essentially, of the Sepulveda transit corridor. So we need to work with them in terms of the amount of right-of-way that is truly available for both that project and for a transit option. So that's why I mentioned earlier we're focused more on either side of the 405 as opposed to the median, given the future express lanes program.
Great. What kind of parking can be expected at the stations, as both in parking location and cost?
Well, we've showed you a few station opportunity areas on the previous slides. We've identified some preliminary locations that could be park and ride lots. Some of the things we're looking at is proximity to the freeway. So how close are those locations to the 405 or to the 101? How convenient might they be for people that are coming off the freeway to get into them, to park their car and to get on the Sepulveda service? So we're looking at a number of options, or locations, I should say, for different park and ride lots. Metro's parking program going forward is a pay-to-park program, so we will in the future have a cost associated with parking at these lots, most likely. So that's something that we'll take into consideration as we look at advancing some of these park and ride options.
What will fares be like for this line when completed?
Right now, we're expecting to keep the Metro fare policy. So today, the fares are $1.75, and they will grow over time. You know, this project's not opening tomorrow, so we expect to use the fares that are in place at the time this line opens, in conjunction with Metro's current fare policy and the increases that are associated with that.
Both here and online, we've gotten questions regarding bikes and cycling to stations. Will there be components in the stations that will be amenable to cyclists and those seeking to use bikes in the first last mile connection?
Yes, definitely. Eric mentioned First Last Mile, which is a program at Metro also that we're looking at improving the first last mile connection to our stations. So that's people that are riding bikes, that could be pedestrians. You know, the options are changing. We have Ubers and Lyfts that are picking up and dropping off people at our stations. So we need to connect with our bus lines. There's all these different options need to be included in the planning of our station areas as we get further along in the study. So definitely we'll look at bikes and pedestrians and all the other modes that potentially are accessing our stations.
Great, great. And the last question that I have on hand, what is the projected traffic on the 405 by the time the rail opens?
It's going to be a mess. I don't have exact numbers today, but we are going to do some future forecasts, looking out to 2042 for some of our transit options. So what will the highway networks look like at that time? How might transit perform within that environment? So we'll come back to you with some of those future estimates, as well as we're also going to look further out, even as far as 2057, and look at how conditions might change. I mentioned earlier, part of the challenge with this project and some of the challenge with planning these long-term projects is making sure that we're developing something that can withstand time and the increase in demand over time. So we'll continue to look at some of these future forecasts. We'll be conservative in terms of what we expect to see in the future, and we'll want to make sure that these transit options will be able to really hold up to the types of ridership and volumes that we hope to see.
Great, great. I know that there's probably some more questions. We do want to leave some time to continue the open house in the back and have some of those one-on-one questions. So at this point, we're going to conclude this segment of Stump the Project Manager. Thank you all very, very much for coming out this evening, and for those who tuned in and watched online. Please continue to stay in touch with us via telephone, email, Twitter, Facebook. We want to hear from you. Please sign up for the project newsletter so we can keep you in the loop on what's going on. And we look forward to seeing you during the next round of community meetings when we just come out to discuss the next segment, the connection between the West Side and LAX. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.